in the dust, you leaders of the flock. The time of your slaughter has arrived. You will fall and shatter like a fragile vase. You will find no place to hide. There will be no way to escape. Listen to the frantic cries of the shepherds. Leaders of the flock are wailing in despair, for the Lord is ruining their pastures. Peaceful meadows will be turned into a wasteland by the Lord's fierce anger. He has left his den like a strong lion seeking its prey, and their land will be made desolate by the sword of the enemy and the Lord's fierce anger. What an incredibly angry portion of Scripture. I don't think in my whole ministry life I've ever preached on this before, but this speaks of our God of wrath. This is not the God of love. This is not the God of compassion. This is not the God of mercy. This is a God who's reached his limit. He has tolerated so much, and now he says, thus far and no further. You will notice in this chapter that it revolves around these Gentile nations and their treatment of the nation of Israel. And I would like to point to you in everything that I talk about today that there's a journey, there's a process, there's a due process that God has. And when nations raise up their fist against God, when they raise up their fist against the nation of Israel or the Jewish people, they bring upon themselves the types of judgments that are measured and stated in this chapter. It's a frightening chapter, and thank God that we all hear mature Christians. We understand the other characteristics of God. Are you ready there, Bar, on number 46 when you're ready? Okay, number 46. Now, I just want to go back to Daniel chapter 4, because I think just about everyone, bar Peter, would have been here when I was dealing with this chapter. And I want to say something that I've never read in any other book or whatever. It's just my convictions about Daniel chapter 4 is the account of the great tree that grew and flourished and represented Nebuchadnezzar. That was cut down and there was a stump left. You remember that? A metal band around it. And I believe that God has shown me some of the importance or significance of that. And first of all, it seems to be mankind's nature. It's human nature to usurp God's authority. It was done in the Garden of Eden, and God's authority was placed by submission to Satan in such a simple and quick way. I wonder how many times God had warned Adam and Eve. How many times? Was it once? Probably not. Was it 100 times? Maybe. Depends how long they lived in the Garden of Eden before the fall. And they would have always been told the consequences of their action. When I was raised and when I raised my children never got punished for this sudden new event that happened in life. They got punished for disobedience. So if they didn't know something was a sin, then it wasn't a sin until they were told. So the first time they did it, they got away with it. But the second time, they got punished. And the umpteenth time, they got punished because they disobeyed an important command. Now, as I look at this tree represents the image that we see in Daniel chapter 2. It represents the image in chapter 3 in some ways. But it's more specific. It's the person this time. It's not the nation, it's not the empire, it's the person of Nebuchadnezzar and what his activities and his power, what it did. And we see that that tree was a blessing to all and sundry. There were all types coming in there, making money or whatever they were doing, making nests in the branches and finding food and protection from the elements and so forth. So that's what that tree represented, was Nebuchadnezzar's life. Now, so we see that at a moment in time in his dream, it was cut off right down at a stump. Now, the stump might have been this high off the ground or higher. It didn't have to be right low to the ground. But we were told some very important things. Nebuchadnezzar was turned to have the brain or the mind of a wild animal, an ox. And he was probably in that state for about 7 years, somewhere in that vicinity. We can't be sure of the exact time because the original text is not clear enough on that, but it's 7 seasons anyway. And I would like to suggest to you that every last one of us, we also have to have our trunk cut off and there needs to be a band put around our hearts. And that is what happens with salvation. We are cut down, just like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. We're cut down. Self has to die. And what needs to replace that is the throne of God himself. Now, in that image on the right-hand side, we see a representation of the throne room of God in heaven, where the glorious presence of the living God will house himself at all times, like the Holy of Holies between the wings of the cherubim in the tabernacle. And so there's your typology, and that's really a symbol of our salvation. Do you see that? It's all the way through the Bible, we see God's wonderful salvation. And so I did talk about that some time ago, and I want to just refer to this and say it's so incredibly important that we go from the selfish human heart, okay, Nebuchadnezzar's heart, the human heart, to heaven's heart for both our lives and the world in which we live. It's so very, very important. Many people don't get there. Many people think that they're quite all right. And we'll move on to the next slide now, please, number 48. I think, if I haven't got my numbering all wrong. Today I want to just touch on the writing on the wall in Daniel chapter 5, if you want to go there. In Daniel chapter 5, we read this account, which I believe has, every single chapter in the book of Daniel has a prophetic application and meaning for us today. And if we're going to survive the days that we're in now, we need to know that this is where it's all described and explained, but in hidden form. It's for those who are listening, for those who are looking, for those who are watching for the Lord's coming. And so I'm going to just mention some of the things I mentioned on Sunday already. In the last decade, well, 2 decades, there have been quite a lot of things that have happened. I'll take you back to the tsunami in 2004, September 11, lots of other things going on everywhere all through this time as well. There's been masses of earthquakes, and there have been volcanic eruptions around the planet, and these things have been escalating. They'll be getting more and more and more and more. Now, we're not told that they are about climate change, because there's no ways that those who spread that fear-mongering can actually prove the point in any way. Those are largely affected by the sun and what is happening on the sun. Those things come and they go, very strongly affected by solar reactions on Earth. Okay, and I don't want to go into the detail too much, but I want to say this. In everything that we see, especially, do you know what I saw on television this morning? Just as I'm coming here, I sometimes listen to British news and Indian news and other places to try and get the truth out of all the lies we're told. And there is Putin having a major conference in the Soviet Union to state his case. And there's Biden, I forget where he is, Romania or somewhere, and he's doing the identical thing. These are two politicians, these are two statesmen, these are two warriors, they're fighters, and they're both telling lies. How on earth do you get the truth? They've both got their audience. And then the media that's telling me this stuff, they've got their own deception they're bringing in. And they say, well, most of the Russians still believe Putin is doing the right thing. You see, we're being lied to left, right, and center. And we need to understand that there's a key here. And the key is when the heathen touch God's people. Now, God's got two lots of people. He said he's got two flocks. And I believe the one flock is the Jewish flock and the other flock is the Gentile flock. And he says he's bringing them in together and they are going to become one flock, one people, totally united. And I was looking at this today and I was thinking about that last picture we had in the throne room of heaven, and I'm thinking, there's Nebuchadnezzar's tree. There's Nebuchadnezzar's throne room. When he's walking along the balcony, he says, look what I have achieved, you know. And there's Biden, he can hardly put one foot in front of the other. He's a bag of bones at the moment. and he can hardly walk. I mean, I'm no room to talk. I wobble all over the place these days, but at least I'm still walking fairly firmly. And but he looks like he hasn't got long to go, you know. And Putin's looking very strong and youthful, and he's only a few years younger, you know. When the heathen touch God's people, that's when you will find the trouble starts. And this is really important. Why is it important? Well, because you need to have your faith and your confidence in the Lord Jesus Christ alone, not only for the gift of eternal life, but for survival in this life. And, you know, when you're young, you may be forgiven for thinking that you can beat the odds and you can have solar panels on the top of your little camper van or whatever it is, and you can duck and weave and escape. When you've got a few children, that becomes a lot more difficult. When your children need an education, it becomes harder. And you might say, well, I'll go off and grow my own plant food, and I'll do this and I'll do that. But the reality is, my observation from being through a war is that when the times get really tough and you've got your backyard full of your beautiful cabbages and lettuces and carrots and whatever, somebody will hop over the fence in the middle of the night and steal the lot from you. There's always something like that goes on. You've got a full tank of petrol, you know that will last you for the next 2 months because you can't buy any until the next morning when the petrol cap is on the concrete driveway and you have none left. You see, this is the type of thing that happens in a war type of environment that we're coming into. But when the heathen go to the last step of disrespect of the living God, then he says, enough is enough. So as we look at Daniel chapter 5, we read this account. So have we got Daniel chapter 5? It starts by saying, many years later, King Belshazzar gave a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he drank wine with them. Well, there's nothing unusual about that. While Belshazzar was drinking the wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver cups that his predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. He wanted to drink from them with his nobles, his wives, and his concubines. So they brought these gold cups taken from the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. While they drank, see how soon this happens, while they drank from them, they praised who? The God of Israel? You've got to be kidding. They praised their idols made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly they saw the fingers of a human hand writing on the plaster wall of the king's palace near the lampstand. The king himself saw the hand as it's writing, and his face turned pale with fright. His knees knocked together in fear, and his legs gave way beneath him. Please answer me. Why would that happen so suddenly? You see, we have in the world today all sorts of corruption and immorality that goes on generation after generation, and we are told how our leaders should be excused from their sins. Do you remember when Clinton had that Monica Lewinsky thing? But he lied blatantly to the entire world. He said, looking at the TV camera, I did not have sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky. But because he had that winsome smile, he got away with it. Do you hear what I'm saying? And our politicians the world over are trying to get away with every crime in the book, and they try and change the law to excuse themselves in every country so they can have more and more power, and we the people have less and less say. That's what's going on. Now here, this king, who I understand is the son of Nebuchadnezzar, whose name has been given to him by his father, who had a born-again experience. Nebuchadnezzar, I believe, got born again. If you go and read the chapter before, you can see why I say that. And now here he is. Now he's a mature-aged man. He's not sitting on his dad's coattails, not anymore. He's in charge. And he decides today. Now, why did it get into his head today? Of all days, He has no idea what's coming the next few hours. He does not know that it's his last day, but he gets it in his head that day that he's going to. He was smarter. So he did the same thing his dad did, and he got the same result. And we're living in the world today where these things are happening. Now, it says here what the gods were that they decided to praise: the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. In other words, the substantial world. And you know what we're being told? We're being told that AI, artificial intelligence, is the God of the future. We're told that the God of money rules over all. We've heard of BlackRock, haven't we? One of the most wealthy organizations on the planet, but it's only been around about 10 years. I'm trying to point the finger at the gods that we are worshipping as the Western world, okay? And these are things that are happening. Now, this is when the writing came on the wall. Now we see that Belshazzar's knees knock. They quake. They shake. Why? Well, I would suggest to you that if he was totally ignorant of what was going on, I probably haven't got that quite the right place again anyway. There we go. That his knees wouldn't have knocked. He would have just said, what's that? What's that? But somehow deep in his heart of hearts, he knew that he'd reached his comeuppance. God had said, mate, you have gone one step too far now. I gave your dad a couple of warnings and chances But you're not getting any because you have paid absolutely no attention to the generation before you. Your own father told you about these things, and you've decided, excuse me, that you know better. Excuse me now. Okay, so let's turn to slide 49, please. Oh, good. Maybe 6 months old. Still tastes the same. In Daniel chapter 5, verse 10, it says, when the queen mother heard what was happening, she hurried to the banquet hall. She said to Belshazzar, long live the king. Don't be so pale and frightened. There is a man in your kingdom who has within him the spirit of the holy gods. She wasn't born again. She hadn't quite got it. During Nebuchadnezzar's reign, this man was found to have insight, understanding, and wisdom like that of the gods. Your predecessor, King Nebuchadnezzar, made him chief over all the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, all of those. This man Daniel, whom the king named Belshazzar, has exceptional ability and is filled with divine knowledge and understanding. He can interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. And of course, we've all heard this, those of us in this meeting this morning. I'm quite sure you've had this many times over. Okay, now that's not quite the slide I was looking for, but while we've got it here, there in the original text, you can see some artist's impression of what it was. Okay, we live in a generation when men lose the fear of the Lord. They think they can do whatever they like. They can do it however they like and whenever they like. And there is no God, so they're not going to account for anything. There is no eternity. So when they're dead, and there's nothing. My friend, if that's what you believe, you're not going to be dead more than 60 seconds before you face an amazing shock, because it's not the end. And God is real, He's alive, and He's there in eternity. Let's turn to the next slide, please. That's the one. Now, looking at Jeremiah 25, which we read earlier in the piece, a long section from there, I believe that what the world is now entering into is a time of the cup of God's wrath. It started a long time ago, but now it's culminating. It started when the children of Israel decided they would not listen to the Lord. We've looked at all of that in the early chapters of Daniel. We've seen how the 70 years of judgment of exile was because they had dishonored God for 490 years, 70 times 7. And now it was their turn. But the Bible talks about the wrath of God being poured out on all peoples, and particularly those who touch God's own. Now, I believe we've just had a massive earthquake. Where did that happen? Was it in London? Or was it in Turkey and Assyria? Who are the peoples who are bent on the destruction of Israel? And this last earthquake, which happened yesterday, came all the way down to Israel. So all those nations in between. Now, God doesn't deal with everyone simultaneously and doesn't deal with everyone in the same way. A few years ago, Haiti had massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, and they've got their world has been so destroyed. You can go to Sudan, you go all around the world. You know, when I was a young man, South Africa was one of the richest nations on the planet, and now they've got no electricity. They just got cut off this last week. Isn't it interesting that the news never told you that? Because you see it's not relevant. Yes, it is relevant. You listen to our politicians, they're warning us that power shortages are soon coming to Australia. We don't need the power shortages. We've got plenty of energy. But our politicians are going to make sure that the power's cut off, you know. And I like to remind you what that means. No television, no fridge, no freezer, no stove, no internet, none of that. No hot water to have a shower. These things are coming our way. Please, it's part of this thing. Now, I want to just look at the cup of God's wrath, and I would like to point to you that we've just been through Oh, please click away until the rest of the images come up on there. This is the image from Nebuchadnezzar. You see the head's gone now. He's gone, so we're just down here. And these empires all coming through. There we go. You see Bob's bringing them down. And you see this Babylon Empire with gold, then silver, bronze. You see the metals that are represented, the gods that they were worshipping. Do you notice that? In chapter 5. And so we see this. And then we've got Greece, Rome, Western Europe, and Eastern Europe. Sorry, that's hidden by the image there. And what I'm trying to say to you today in my roundabout way is that the nations of the world who are so disrespecting God. I heard Biden today. Now, Putin already has a really good relationship with the Grand Poobah of the Russian Orthodox Church. They're pretty good mates. And Biden says at the end of his speech, he said, God bless you. How hypocritical. Who's God? The God that he approves of abortion? You hear what I'm saying? He says he's a good Roman Catholic. Well, if that's a good Roman Catholic, doesn't say much for Catholicism, does it? But I wouldn't say that of all Roman Catholics. I'm pointing to Biden here. And I would like to point to you that we are now at that stage where God is starting to deal with nations. When you look at Turkey, what a devastating experience they've been through. The people are traumatized. But I don't think there are any more traumatized than the people of the Ukraine and the nations where bombs and bullets have flown for generations. And I believe that that what is happening is that this is the outpouring or the beginnings of the outpouring of the wrath of God on our world. And so Belshazzar is given his warning, and then he gives lots of rewards to Daniel. And we see that Daniel says, well, don't bother with that because it won't be yours or mine tomorrow. Your days are over, you know. He's just a spokesman. He's not antagonistic towards Belshazzar. Just tells him what the writing on the wall means. He says, your time is up. You have disrespected the living God, but I point to you how he disrespected God, and I point to you how this is going on in our world today. So where does that leave me? That leaves me in this position. I can save up 5 years' worth of food to hide away in my garage or my little underground, whatever it is. I can save up a matzo of fuel and all these things, and it can be taken from me in a split second. Okay? And the older we get, the more we know we can't run very fast. So that's where it is. So what is the key for us? It's the same key it is for the young man and the young woman who got 5 kids or 10 kids or whatever number of children they have. Our trust can only be not in gold, silver, wood, metal, whatever, but in the living God to lead every step of every day. Now, at the end of September 11, there were people whose alarm clock failed them that day. And because their alarm clock failed them, they were not in the tower when they came down, right? There was people who were going there for a tourist thing. And somehow or other, they missed a connection and they never got there. And there are other people who shouldn't have been there, but were there. And what we need to understand is that God sorts the people. He filters all those things. And if only we just sit in his perfect plan, his perfect purpose. Please, do you hear what I'm saying? Do you see that all of this stuff as a born-again Christian is a distraction from sharing the gospel with those who should be full of fear? Because their world is coming to an end, and their system of government and judgment is coming to an end. I'd like to leave it there now. Thank you, Bar. But I'd like you to take that away. And the thing that I especially want you to consider is when you see the politicians, people like Daniel Andrews, attacking the Christians, be assured that he's bringing on himself some very, very profound wrath that's going to come from heaven, you know. And we've got a very, very volatile world we're living in. What do? Just get on serving God. What do? Well, sure, if you want to save yourself some extra food and you've got a freezer or something, sure, if you want to do that. But look, I'm not making any major effort to do that. I really am not.